Well, hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to video number 5 in the BVM F-16 1/5 scale Venom scheme build. It is engine installation time. We're going to start this video in the build series off with installing the engine, the pipe, the smoke tanks. So let's get busy. All right, last video we kind of got our plan figured out here. We're going to continue on with our plan. So got a couple things in the works here. Number one, I am going to pull all this stuff out. Number two, the front brace that's underneath this front intake. I want to drop that intake just a little bit so our bypass sits inside the intake pipe here. So we're going to have to sand out about 1/4 of an inch from that brace that this intake sits on. So let's yank all this stuff out and we'll get that sanded out. So I find the easy way to make sure you don't go too far on sanding something like this is always mark it out. So just take a Sharpie, do a rough line so you don't go past that. So we're just going to make the Sharpie mark disappear, and that should be really close to what we're after. All right, so that's perfect. That's exactly what I was going for. So we got just enough of that former taken out so we could move the duct here back a little bit, move our bypass lower portion back forward a little bit, get a little bit of an overlap, which is ideal because this is going to hold the duct in place. So we're going to use probably a dab of silicone on each side of the duct and put some Gorilla Tape over the front because we do want to make this removable for any service in the future. With all this figured out, now we're going to put the smoke tanks back in. We're going to get our vent tubing sorted out here for the main tanks, and then we'll be able to put the engine in. All right, so taking a look at the smoke tanks here, we've got a little bit of work to do. We're going to take all of our little compression clips off, replace that with tie wire. We're going to take our zip ties off, replace that with safety wire, tie wire, and that's how we're going to be doing these tanks. So we've taken the smoke tanks apart, serviced them all, and put them back together here, and everything's been tie wired, everything's been adjusted so the lengths are all equal. We also shortened the lines a little bit as well. Now we want to keep these lines long because we don't have good access to the tanks when they're installed. So if we had really good access to these tanks, I would get them installed and I would install the lines, tie wire them in place, make the lines all short. But the problem is that you don't have good access in this aircraft. So we've got that all done. They are ready to go back in the aircraft. After that, we can continue on with the engine. All right, so before we put the smoke tanks back in, we're just doing a little bit of wire tidying here. So put some ties, some Velcro strapping over top the lower wires just to keep everything kind of nice and bunched together. This is the light controller here, and then underneath there's a plastic box, and that's where all the T's for all of the air systems in the aircraft go into. So it looks like BVM does that to keep all the T's protected. So we're just going to leave this stuff as is, but we've done a little bit of cleanup here. So we put some Velcro around the back of the wires, took a zip tie, put it around the other zip tie that's holding this all in place. And generally I would put shoe goop on this, but because this zip tie is here, that's going to hold all of our wires in place. But we will add a little bit of shoe goop on the main lead that comes into the light controller. That's kind of an important one, so we will get that kind of stuck in place, and then we're ready to put our smoke tanks back in. So smoke tanks are in. Now we're just kind of working on the other tank setup here. Now this is where we get into some of the tricky bits. So we've got our one tank on this side, our other main tank on that side. Both of the clunk lines from those main tanks go to the vent lines on the front tank. So remember, when you're doing a fuel system like this, we're going to add fuel to the UAT, which we've strapped in right there. We've gone with a Model Aviation Products high flow UAT. So we're going to fill up the UAT. That UAT is going to go to the front tank. That front tank is going to fill up. It's going to come out the vent lines. It's going to go to the bung fittings of the back tanks. Those back tanks are going to fill up. They're going to come out the vent lines and go through the vent fitting out the fuselage. So we have this tank on this side, which is going to require a fairly large piece of tubing. Now, this one would require a lot shorter piece of tubing. The problem is if you put a shorter piece of tubing on here, now your tanks are going to feed at different rates. And this is how this aircraft was set up from the beginning, which causes issues. So we've taken our longest piece of tubing going from our main tank to our front tank, and we're going to make an exact match for the other tank. Now the other tank, it's going to have to loop around some stuff and make sure we're not interfering with anything, but that is super important to make sure that this fuel system works properly. So now these are our lines that go between the front tank and the main tank. All right, so our vent line is done. Our main tank lines here are done, and everything's been tie wired. So that is all finished, all complete. We've used keepers here instead of the stock zip ties that were used before. So everything's a lot cleaner, neater, and a little bit shorter as well. So these two lines here are the lines that are going to plug in to the vent lines on the forward tank that goes right there. So now before I put that tank in, what I do is I plan out that loop that's going to come over here to the high flow map tank. So that's going to come to this top fitting right there and go to the bung fitting on the forward tank. So just kind of gearing up towards getting the turbine installed and everything. So playing around with the intake duct a little bit, the bypass and that stuff. So because we don't have a lot of overlap here, I want to make a bit of a lip system on the bypass. So what this is going to do is this is going to catch that front duct and go right in between the bypass and the wood and make sure that we've got a solid interlock between those two pieces. So that's the point of these little tabs here. So all I did was take some thin, I think this is 1/16 ply, put a little rounded edge from my sander there, and that just helps to follow the curve of the bypass. So we're just getting these high solid in place so they can cure till tomorrow. And I'm just using a little bit of CA to lock them in place. You can see there, kind of leaving a bit of a gap. All right, so we've got all of our lines run and safety wired in place. We've got our map tank mounted. We've got all of our plumbing mounted to the fuel pump. Now it makes to me the most sense to put the fuel pump here versus up front. Now when you look at the manual and the layout and stuff, it kind of shows the fuel pump right here. Problem with putting the fuel pump there is you've got the UAT here, you've got about 2 feet to the intake on the fuel pump, and why not put the fuel pump here, have a nice short little run to the fuel pump, and then this short little run will go right to the turbine. So it's a nice compact installation. I like to always keep that line feeding the fuel pump from the UAT as short as possible. So in this case, we've got a high flow line. It's stepped down to 6 millimeter for the intake side of the Sweewind fuel pump. And this is also the brand new Sweewind fuel pump that has started rolling out as well. So what we can do now is we are going to get these lines kind of figured out, but we're going to get the ducting put in place now. So that's the next thing we're going to work on is the intake duct and the bypass. Get that stuff sorted out. Now our little keeper tabs worked out perfect. There's a great amount of space right there to interlock with the intake duct. Now I think I'm going to put a little bit of silicone on the former that is on the underside here. If this ever needs to come out, we do have good access from the underside. Just slice the silicone pretty easy, and we'll probably put a little dollop on the top here where it fits to the intake of the aircraft. And I just want this to be nice and solid without a permanent mount. So removable if it ever needs to come out, because you need to take this out if the tanks need to come out. So we've got the bypass lower portion screwed in place. The pipe is just sitting there. The engine is just sitting there. But the point of all this is to get everything lined up. And we've drilled out our first front 2 holes on the turbine. So what we'll do now is we're going to pull everything out. Then we're going to treat the bypass, get the pipe mounted, do all that stuff. We've got a bunch of heat treating to do in this area as well. So let's pull this engine out and get that stuff started. So the paint protection we're adding on here is going to go on the tanks in this area. So from the back of the tank to the joint, and we're going to do the lower bypass basically right to this line right here. So you can see I've sanded the bypass, sanded the tanks. Going to give this a quick rinse off with some rubbing alcohol to get rid of the dust. And then we'll put some tape on here, some masking tape, and we will get this whole back end that's beside the tail cone heat protected. All right, so we got our second coat of heat shield on the rear area. And if you're not familiar with what I'm using, this is heat shield from BVM, ceramic coating. It's basically paint that is ceramic, so latex paint with ceramic in it, pretty straightforward. We're also doing the underside of the rear brace as well too, so that is being coated as we do our rear section. And I did some sanding on the chute area here. Now we've got a few pinholes in areas to fill, so we're going to get that stuff filled and drying. You can see there some pinholes, holes on the end, and some pinholes on that side. So we'll get all those filled and we'll have to sand that out again. All right, so we've got 3 coats done. We've got our pipe installed. I didn't explain this before, but I took those back screws out on the engine rails just so they wouldn't get coated in the heat shield. So we've obviously reinstalled those with Loctite. Pipe's been installed. We used some nice big Allen key pan head wood screws on the pipe, which is awesome. And that stuff is all solid now. So I think the next thing that we can do is get this engine installed. We've got good access to our fuel pump still to plug that in. We've got our line already installed on the output line of the pump. So we pretty much have everything done back here that we'll need. The only thing we'll need access to is the fill line right there. So I may put some 6mm line on the UAT first, just so we got good access. All right, so engine's installed, quite simple. Because we previously did our front screws, we did those screws up first, drilled the 2 rearward ones, vacuumed up the dust, and put the same screws in. Now I'll show you the screws that we're using for this, and these are the same screws we used to mount the pipe. So this is what they look like here, and I'll show you the package they come in. All right, so here they are. I've been getting these at Great Hobbies here in Canada. So I guess 3mm by 15. They're awesome. I really like these for mounting turbines. Now, one thing I'll do when I mount a turbine with wood screws. Many people don't feel that wood screws are a good idea when it comes to mounting things like turbines, but I like it. I think it's a better option than using a blind nut. I feel I've got more control over a location, where it goes. One of the secrets I do when I tighten up these wood screws for the last time is, yes, I put some thin CA on the hole, but I'll put some thin CA on the screw, and what that does is it kind of locks it in place. So right now those screws have been sitting in that plane for a while, but if we go over there and undo them, it kind of goes pop or snap, and they snap loose and then they're free. But the little bit of CA helps to keep it in place, and it never comes out unless you want it to. So little tip for you. All right, so next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna get our carbon support braces reinstalled. Now, if you remember in the original videos, we marked these guys rear and front, and we have an arrow pointing forwards. Now, it probably doesn't matter because they're fairly probably generic, but that's the reason to mark them, is so they go back in nice and easy. So we're gonna get these installed. One of the reasons we wanna get the braces installed is our fill line. We kind of use a special fill line for this customer, and we're probably gonna mount our little receptacle on the front cross brace here. So we'll see how that all works out, but we still have good access to everything down here. Here's our line that's going to be coming to the turbine. Got our turbine plug right there, so super easy to access everything in this area. So I'm going to get these cross braces installed. So a couple of the final details here are complete. Obviously our braces are installed. I put 2 coats of paint on the top of the braces, so in the last view this was wood, and now we're painted silver, so they kind of blend in a little bit nicer. What else did we do here? We got our line hooked up to the front of our turbine for the fuel supply, and we mounted some keepers here for our fill line and our little container down there, which houses our fill unit. So that gets stored right down like that. I actually battled a little bit with where to put that fill line. I was going to put it on the side of the tank here, and I thought, no, that's probably a better spot right down in that location. So engine compartment is very close to being done. We've got to run our line for our turbine forward, but that is some awesome progress tonight. So it's the next day and everything is cured and solid. So our tube holder here, our startup holder, our fill line holder's all done. So that is how we have the fill line organized, so nice and solid. And there's a whole bunch of excess loop in there as well too, so you'll be able to undo this and pull it right out, quite far out from the aircraft. So that worked out good. Put our little label there as well too. Okay, so the back end here is essentially done. We do still have to run the turbine cable forward, so we'll get that organized. Now, one thing we need to do on this aircraft is, because our turbine is back here and our data relay module or ECU is going to be up front here, we need to have an extension cable between the fuel pump and the ECU, and also the turbine and the ECU as well. So in this case, the Swiwen engines come with a cable for the engine, and they come with a cable for the fuel pump. So I like to combine these two. That gives us a nice long cable for the fuel pump, and then we'll do a single cable. We'll make one up, a custom one, for the engine itself. And we've got the same wire here that Swiwen uses, and we'll do up a single piece cable for that. So other thing we did yesterday was we put a skim coat on top of our chute mechanism. So what I'll do as well with this is we're going to get this all sanded out and get it all pretty looking. That should have filled the pinholes just perfect. So we do have a lot of sanding to do there, but we'll get that sanded off as well. All right, so we've got our chute thing all primed, obviously sanded, primed. And if you look closely, you can see our sanding marks there. So that's the purpose of the fill primer coat, is we're going to let this dry, and then we will do some wet sanding to this piece, and we will do our final painting once that's done. We still have a little bit of fill area to do there. Kind of sad I didn't get that, but we will fill those areas as well, so we have a good final product. All right, so while we're waiting for paint to dry here, we're going to get the smoke nozzle put back in. So this is the stock smoke nozzle, stainless steel smoke nozzle. It's got an open end on it with a bend on the tube. So this is what's going back on in the smoke nozzle. Now, one of the things here that I've noticed is the fitting is no good. So if you look at the Festo type fitting here, it does fit over the tube. This is a 4mm metric tube, but we're pushed in all the way, doesn't hold. So that concerns me, because you wouldn't want this to blow off and then be shooting smoke oil all over the place. So we're not going to use this. I've tried putting a stock Festo tube adapter on here, and it doesn't grab the tube either. So we can try making a line on here. I know that helps grab the tube. So maybe that's the first thing we'll do, but I think what I'm probably going to do is expand some 4mm Festo tubing over top of this, use some safety wire, and that's how we're going to approach this. All right, so trying to figure out where to put the on-off valve for the smoke system. So in a situation like this, you want to have a physical on-off valve to make sure that you don't have smoke fluid flowing out of the tube, out of the smoke nozzle. So we're going to put an on-off valve right here on the intake, but we need something to mount our valve holder to. So we've got these awesome Festo valve holders, but I want to have something that's a little bit better fitting to the intake. So these valve holders are available along with a whole bunch of other things that we very commonly use on all of our planes we make at my website, thelightersideofrc.com. You can find these little guys. They are awesome. And let's take a look at the other part we're making. So we're using our Bamboo X1 carbon machine here. I just drew this part up in Tinkercad. Took about 5 minutes to draw it up. It's essentially just a black flat piece of plastic with a circle cutout in it. So it's got a bit of a curve that hopefully follows the curvature of the intake that we're going to glue it onto. So the X1 carbon is just getting set up to print that. It should be done in about 9 minutes is what it says right there. So we're printing that part in PETG carbon fiber, which is in this unit right here. Now this machine has been an amazing addition to the shop. The 3D printers in general have been awesome, but the reason I love this machine so much is I can go in on Tinkercad, do a simple drawing or 3D drawing of something. It takes me a few minutes. I plug it into the machine. In this particular case, this part is going to be done in like under 15 minutes from setup time to final print. And I love this machine because it basically is just plug and play. You upload the part, you tell it what filament you're using, and it generally 99% of the time always works good. So if you guys are interested in the ordering the X1 carbon, I do have a referral link down below in the description of this video. Full disclosure, if you order either the machines or filament or parts or anything like that through that link, I do get a small kickback from it. So highly recommend the Bamboo lineup of machines, guys. These things are phenomenal. It has started printing my part. Let's take a look at it. There we go. So I wasn't overly sure on the size, so I kind of just guessed at the curvature. So we'll see what happens. I did it about 2 inches long and I think 1 inch wide. So 25 millimeters by 50 millimeters. So we'll come back and take a look at this thing in about 9 minutes. So first one I printed didn't have enough angle to it, so I just shrinked my diameter of my circle a little bit, so we had a little bit more angle on the end pieces here, and this matches the intake dimensions perfectly. So this is going to get glued onto the intake. The valve mount is going to get mounted on like that, and then our valve obviously sits in right there. So that is going to be our smoke on and off setup. So each one of these valve holders comes with a drill template, so we will get that drilled out so we can get this mounted. All right, so we've got everything mounted here, and I drilled some holes in the bottom so our epoxy would have something solid to grab onto. So we've mixed up some High-Sol 9462, and we'll just install this nice and thick right in the middle, and make sure we get a substantial amount inside of our holes there. So when we install this on the duct, we basically want the High-Sol to kind of ooze out and form to everything. So that's why we're putting a substantial amount on here. There we go. So we got this glued in place. And just for reference, the way I'm organizing this is with the valve in the closed position, it's facing towards the back of the aircraft. So this side is kind of tucked underneath an overhang, so this makes it easy to use the valve. All right, so we've got that glued in place with High-Sol. Also glued a 6mm keeper line right there for our fill line for our smoke. So that fill line is going to come off of a T that's installed on the suction side of our tank system. So this is the suction side for the smoke system. This is our intake side for the smoke pump. So we'll just have a T in here, and that line is going to go back towards our fill line. So when we want to fill the smoke tank with fluid, we just use that T. So I remember reading in the manual, I can't remember where or what specifically it said, but they want you to reinforce the pins and latches and everything. So I've been kind of slowly doing this, but now that we've kind of getting towards the end here, I've mixed up some additional High-Sol and we will add that to our latches and pins. All right, and to finish off our evening, we got our afterburner light reinstalled. It was kind of skewed towards the top side before, so now we're pretty much even all the way around. Took those pins, bent them down a little bit, put some shoe goop in between the connector and the board on the light to hold everything in place and give it a little bit of insulation between the pipe. And then the other thing I did right here where the wire comes through is put a little bit of shoe goop there to hold the wire. So we want to have access to that wire, but there you go, it's nice and hidden and reinstalled. It's the next day, our on-off valve mount in here is all done. So we've run the line from the smoke stick to the on-off valve. So I was talking in the earlier clips about the direction of this valve. So if we flip this valve around, problem is that in the off position it would be tucked underneath here. So the reason I ran the valve this way is simply because of access. So it's going to be a lot easier to access this now in this type of position. So last thing we need to do here is we're going to put a bit of adhesive on the smoke stick while it is centered in the pipe. So there's nothing really holding that smoke stick in place other than friction on those little clips. So we'll put a little bit of material on there, probably shoe goop, I think. And that's gonna hold that smoke stick in the middle position. So what I do here is I'm just gonna adjust it a little bit. And I guess actually one of the things about it that holds it in place is the sitting against the engine rails here. So I pushed it all the way down. Let's see where it's sitting now. All right, so with that sitting all the way down, we are very close to the midpoint on the turbine. So I think that's exactly where we're going to run that thing. And that's going to allow it to have a nice sturdy positioning. So last thing to do in the back end here, as far as the engine installation goes, is to run our cable from the fuel pump forward. Now, because we're using a joint here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a piece of shrink tubing over top of this joint, and then there's no way that that's going to come apart unless we want it to. All right, so with the back end completed, we're going to move into the front end here a little bit and start working our way into getting all of the items installed. So the first thing that kind of jumps out at me is how flexible this plywood front board is. Now, it's fine, probably gonna be good, but we're probably gonna be mounting our Cortex gyro right in this area right there, I think. So what I wanna do is I wanna reinforce some of the underside of this board just to stiffen it up a little bit. So I'm gonna kinda initially come out with my layout here. I think my central box is gonna go there. Smoke pump, we'll put it back where it was. Probably put our ECU/data relay module right in this area so our cables can come up through here. And I think that's probably how we're gonna lay things out. Cortex is probably gonna go in this area, and then we've got a bunch of extra area to do some other things with our V-Speak and such. So I'm gonna just play around with the initial layout here, and we'll take a look at what I come up with. All right, so we've used the bandsaw here to make up some Cortex mounts. Now these are the way I like to mount my Cortexes now, so I'll glue or use the adhesive to mount the Cortex to a plate. And in this case, we're using I think that's a 1/4-inch piece of aircraft ply, so very good quality ply. And we've got a piece of our faux carbon ABS stuff on there. So we will adhere that to the plate, drill 4 screw holes in the corners, and now we've got a Cortex that is mountable, movable, and easy to take on and off if needed. All right, so there's kind of the major layout stuff here for the tray. So we've got our central box right here. We've skewed it just a little bit over so we're not close to the edge, but it looks like with the stock mounting, we should be able to fit it there. I want it in the spot because I want to be able to put our power wires through here and down and then towards the front of the aircraft. So that is why they're going there. Cortex, we want to get it mounted in the center. Now we don't need to mount it in the center. The Cortex could mount really wherever we want. So we could put the Cortex there if we wanted, but we got lots of room on this board. So we're going to mount that in the center of the board. And that'll get screwed in place, which will be awesome. Now, even this mount, with the thickness of this mount and wood and everything, this should be substantially stiffer than just gluing or using the adhesive to get the Cortex onto the board itself. So I think that is going to be our problem solver right there. And that's kind of our layout. So we've got lots of room here for other stuff, so we can put our ECU wherever we need to. We've got our air valve for our chute mechanism. We've got our V-speak module to put in this area. So we got lots of room to tuck those guys in, and the board will be nice and clean and organized. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make up my lead for the turbine. I've talked about that a little bit, so it's pretty straightforward. It's just a male end, and we'll use the Swewin wire. Now this here is a roll of the Swewin wire that the factory cables and stuff are made with. So this is what I use to make my extensions, along with the, I believe they're called MR30 ends. All right guys, apologize for jumping all over the place, but kind of flipping back and forth right now on various things. So we've done our wet sanding on the chute mechanism here, and you can see where the primer has filled in all the scratches, and we are ready for our final paint coat on this. So we'll get that done. There's a little bit of touch-ups to do on the joint between the two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this first, pull all the tape off, see what those touch-ups look like, and I'm probably going to clear coat the entire thing together, but we'll have to see how everything looks. So we've got our paint done, and obviously our prep pulled off the added piece here. Color looks really good. I think it shows up well on the camera, but it's a nice color. Obviously we've got gloss to matte finish. So anyways, once that's all clear coated, I think it'll blend in nicely. So we've got a couple small touch-ups to do in the black and the gray. So what I'm going to do is wait for this to dry fully, and then we will do sanding on the entire piece, and then we will clear coat everything together. I think that's going to be the best option to make it all blend in. We're also going to install our light on the bottom portion here as well. So we've been waiting to do that for quite a while. And that's this light right here. So that'll also allow us to do our touch-ups when we glue this light in place. And we've got a couple more things added to the board here. So we've added our Cortex, obviously, our central box, our Swewin data relay module, or ECU, is mounted there. And I've left this spot open here for batteries, any lines and stuff for the pump and the engine. Initially, I kind of had this tucked further this way, but this is a nice balance, so we could still use this to run all of our big stuff through. So I think we're good with that stuff so far. Now, the only other things we really need to add to this board are our valve for the chute mechanism and our V-speak. Now the V-speak needs to go in between stuff, so we'll kind of figure that out here as well, but that is our board so far, looking good. Now one of the changes we have to make here is in our programming on this plane, we don't use the black box here for nose in and out. So if you're using the stock setup, what's going to happen is when you do gear up signal, this black box turns your nose steering servo off. Well, we're going to get rid of that, and our nose out, which is our line that goes to our servo, that is just going to plug directly into our central box. Now, why on earth would we do that? Well, that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked. Well, the way this is programmed is our central box is, and our Cortex really, our Jetty system is the better way to put it. We've got 16 channels available. So when you're dealing with a plane like this, your 16 channels, you can have the Cortex control those 16 channels, which is super cool. So the way this is programmed is when we do gear up, there's a program in the radio that's already been done that turns the nose steering off. And when we've got gear down, it's controlled by the Cortex. So the Cortex is like an extra rudder channel is how it's operating. So that is why we're going to get rid of those lines and simplify things there. So I think I'm happy with this installation. I better be, because we're already plugged in. All right, so we flipped the board over here. I use a pair of side cutters and cut all of my screws off that were coming through. We don't want those to be rubbing on anything, so we've got all those cut off. Next thing we need to do is we need to add a T into the air system here that will feed or tie into the compressor system. So this entire air system's all plumbed together, so it comes to this location right here, and you've got those lines splitting off and going to the 2 tanks. So it's kind of a nice setup on this aircraft because you've only got 2 air tanks, so you don't need to make any adjustments to this air system to add the compressor in, other than just adding a T into the system here. It really doesn't matter where you add it, but we want to be adding it on the appropriate size line here. So it's 2mm line everywhere else, and the main line here is 3mm line-ish, which is where we want to add it. So I'm going to just cut this here, and we're going to add a T right in this location. In this situation, I always like to use a metal T, and there's a couple reasons why I like to use a metal T. So the Robart ones are nice. This is also a nice one as well. The stock line will fit over this very well, the air line. Now on the other side, we need to use a 3mm Festo line. So the Festo line is a little bit bigger inner diameter. So when I put the Festo line on these metal T's, they fit really tight, and then I just put a little bit of tie wire on them just to hold them in place. But it's a key component when you're adding a compressor into an air system to make sure you're using the metal T. So we're going to go metal T, 3mm line, 3 to 4 increaser or reducer, and then we'll go from the 4mm line into the compressor with a piece of Teflon tubing. All right, and there we've got our T added in, so just simply cut the line, put it in. You can see our Festo line here with the tie wire holding it on. So that's going to come back, and our compressor is going to be mounted in this area underneath. So we will work on that, but that is our tie-in point. Okay, so as we go through this, we're just adding our other components in now. So we have our single valve here. Now this single valve is going to power the chute mechanism, but the key with this is we also need an air supply here as well too. So great time to add this in. We'll need to put another T in the line that we just cut for the compressor. But I figured this is going to plug in right here because our feed line can come through here. We'll put another hole right there, and that will be perfect and beautiful. Could also add it in this area as well to stay with the other valves, but really not any benefit to that. This is nice and clean. Our servo line is going to go through there. Now keep in mind that the chute mechanism, valve, and our door locks are all powered by the SE6. So I think the SE6 is going to get stuck underneath the board. We'll have the one wire coming up to the channel, but all the other lines will be buried underneath the board. We will be able to pull this up if needed, but just nice to have it a little bit cleaner if possible. So that's the plan that I've laid out for that. All right, and here we've added another metal T, and we've installed our line feeding our air valve for the chute mechanism. So now we'll put a little hole here, and we'll run a line back to our other line coming from the chute right there. All right, guys, and that's going to wrap up video number 5 in the BVM build series. This very large F-16 1/5 scale is going together very nicely. Just foreshadowing a little bit, I don't know if we will get this wrapped up in one more video. And the reason I say that is we've got lots of work still to do, scale details. We've got to finish the chute mechanism, so there is still quite a bit to do on this aircraft. So maybe one more video, more likely 2. So if you guys have any questions or comments, make sure you list them down below. You can also reach out to me at thelightersideofrc@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out the Lighter Side of RC After Dark. The After Dark is a separate channel. There's links down below in the video description. And if you subscribe to that channel, we do live streams here from the shop. And they're usually Saturday evenings is pretty typical for about 2 hours. And it's just fun. We get to do lots of different things. Obviously, we're sharing real-time builds and what we actually do here in the shop. And it's also an opportunity for you guys to interact with me and whoever's here with me. And you can ask questions. And we spend a lot of time during the 2 hours just answering questions and asking questions and interacting. So check it out, guys, if you're interested. It's kind of a fun, unique thing to do. So that's everything, guys. We'll see ya in the next video.